Macmillan Audio presents Why Him, Why Her? By Helen Fisher, Ph.D. Read for you by the author.
Chapter 1. I am large. I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman. Eavesdropping on Mother Nature. Why him? Why her? Now you will feel no rain, for each of you will be shelter to the other. Now you will feel no cold, for each of you will be warmth to the other. Now there is no more loneliness for you, for there is one life before you. Go now to your dwelling place, to eat your days together, and may your days be very long upon this earth. The Apache Indians of the American Southwest probably recited this wedding poem for centuries before I heard it in La Jolla, California, in 2006. It was an early June evening, the sky still pink and blue, the sea smells wafting through the windows as I sat in a folding chair on the second story of a fancy Italian restaurant. An older gentleman was conducting a short wedding ceremony, one mixed with rituals from the Christian, Jewish, and Apache traditions. And before me glowed the two celebrants, Patrick and Suzanne, one of the first couples to marry after meeting on the internet dating site that I had helped to design, Chemistry.com. Patrick had been a journalist in New Orleans until he lost his job, his home, and all of his belongings to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. West he went, taking up residence with relatives in Los Angeles in February 2006. Days after settling in, he joined Chemistry.com and received his first recommended match, Suzanne, a lawyer living in La Jolla. That first night they talked for 3 hours on the phone. They met the following weekend and fell passionately in love. So on a balmy evening during an April vacation together in Paris, Patrick took her to the top of the Eiffel Tower and proposed. The dazzled young woman grinned her yes. So here I sat in La Jolla, surrounded by some 50 of their friends and relatives on this festive wedding eve. I like being around people who are in love. They have a contagious energy. This force was palpable in the groom, the first to arrive for the nuptials. He burst into the room, filling it with his vivacious charm. Although we had never met, he greeted me warmly. We instantly struck up a conversation about the evolution of the English language, his experience as a journalist in some dangerous parts of Africa, and some of my past work on the brain chemistry of romantic love. Others soon arrived, and we took our places on the folding chairs facing a small bar strewn with lilies. Last came the bride. I was stunned when I saw her, a tiny, perfectly formed, porcelain-like doll with huge blue eyes and long auburn hair in soft ringlets wreathed in forget-me-nots. Like the mythological Helen, Suzanne had a face that could launch 1,000 ships, and her vigor matched his. She was enraptured by her prince, gazing at him and grinning with uncontainable effervescence as she said, "I do." Someone played a flute, the Apache poem was read, and as the bride and groom walked down the makeshift aisle between our seats, we blew bubbles at them from the little bottles left on our chairs. Then came the feast, platters of cavatelli marinara, antipasto rustico, mussels, sausages, chicken fra diavolo. A host of Italian favorites appeared at every table amid the balloons, confetti, and champagne as the disc jockey blasted out old tunes and we wildly danced. Patrick and Suzanne swirled among us, radiating joy. Love hopes all things, the Bible says. I hoped for Patrick and Suzanne, but I also had a reason to be optimistic about their marriage. I knew some things about their personalities because both had taken my personality test, a series of questions I had devised to establish some basic things about a person's biological temperament. Both had told me their test results, and from these data I was confident that Patrick's particular chemical profile would complement Suzanne's, creating a biological and psychological cocktail that could keep them captivated with each other for years. We have many inborn tendencies. Indeed, scientists now believe some 50% of the variations in human personality are associated with genetic factors. We inherit much of the fabric of our mind. But what is personality? Psychologists define it as that distinct cluster of thoughts and feelings that color all of a person's actions. Your personality is more than just your biology, of course. Personality is composed of two fundamentally different types of traits, those of character and those of temperament. Your character traits stem from your experiences, your childhood games, your parents' interests and values, how people in your community express love and hate, what relatives and friends regard as polite, dangerous, or exciting, how they worship, what they sing, when they laugh, what they do to make a living and relax. These and innumerable other cultural forces combine to build your unique set of character traits. The balance of your personality is your temperament, all of those biologically based tendencies you have inherited, traits that emerge in early childhood to produce your consistent patterns of feeling, thinking, and behaving. As the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset put it, I am plus my circumstances. Temperament is the I am, the foundation of who you are. Curiosity, creativity, novelty-seeking, compassion, cautiousness, competitiveness. To some degree, you inherit these and many other aspects of your disposition. It was this part of the human spirit that I had examined in Patrick and Suzanne, their biological temperament. No one knows precisely how many traits of temperament we human beings inherit, but studies of identical twins suggest we inherit many. Take the Giggle twins, as they were called by staff members of the Minnesota Twin Study in the 1970s, because these women would erupt with peals of laughter at the slightest jest or turn of phrase. Daphne and Barbara were born to an unmarried Finnish student living in England in 1939. Barbara was adopted by an English groundskeeper who worked in a public park, while Daphne grew up in the home of a wealthy metallurgist. Yet when they first came together again at age 39 as part of the Minnesota Twin Study, which focused on identical twins reared apart, both loved good pranks and both had giggled all their lives. Both regularly sat on their hands to keep from nervously gesticulating. Both had dyed their hair auburn. Both were effusively energetic. Both hated math and sports. Both avoided commercial television. Both preferred the color blue. Both were unwilling to give political opinions, and both had met their husbands at age 16 at a town hall dance and married in the autumn. Their IQ scores were nearly identical too, despite Daphne's expensive education and Barbara's far more modest schooling. Coincidence? Psychologist Thomas Bouchard, director of the Minnesota Twin Study, unearthed so many stories like this one that in the 1980s he proposed that dozens of personality traits have a degree of heritability. Among those with the strongest genetic links, he reported, were traditionalism, the willingness to capitulate to authority, aggressiveness, the drive to lead, and the appetite for attention. As he wrote in 1984, both the twin studies and the adoption studies converge on the surprising finding that common family environmental influences play only a minor role in the determination of personality. In recent decades, human behavior geneticists have added substantially to this list of traits linked with our DNA. More important to this book, scientists now know that groups of interacting genes influence behavior, even act together to create behavior syndromes. For example, if you have a biological appetite to seek novelty, you are also likely to be energetic, spontaneous, risk-taking, curious, and creative. If you are predisposed to be traditional instead, you are also likely to be loyal, cautious, respectful of authority, and eager to make plans and follow schedules. We express constellations of related personality traits, creating what are commonly called personality types. In fact, after doing extensive research on the biological underpinnings of personality types, I've come to believe that each of us expresses a unique mix of 4 broad, basic personality types. Moreover, our primary personality type steers us towards specific romantic partners. Our biological nature whispers constantly within us to influence who we love. These thoughts and more were swimming through my mind as I blew those bubbles at Patrick and Suzanne on that enchanting wedding evening. I thought both had found their soulmate. Who are you? Why are we naturally attracted to particular mates? My investigation of these mysteries started over the Christmas holiday in 2004. Match.com. Why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? This is what the executive team at Match.com wanted to know when I met them 2 days after Christmas 2004 in New York City. Match.com is the world's largest internet dating site, and I had been invited to spend the day with them, thinking. Mid-morning, they asked me this fundamental question. No one really knows, I responded. Psychologists have determined that men and women tend to fall in love with individuals from the same ethnic and socioeconomic background, with those of the same level of education, intelligence, and physical attractiveness, with individuals holding similar religious, political, and social values, and with those who have a similar sense of humor. We also fall in love when the timing is right, and often with someone who lives or works nearby. Your childhood plays a huge role in your romantic choices, although no reliable patterns have ever been established. We tend to fall in love with someone who provides us with the things we need, and people often fall in love with those who are in love with them. But, as I told the Match.com executives, how two individual personalities match up remains unknown. People do not necessarily court, live with, or marry someone with similar or different personality traits. In fact, some 470 studies have examined the mesh of two personalities in a marriage, and psychologist Marcel Zentner summed up these data saying, preference for similarity in personality characteristics varies substantially across traits and individuals. As he put it, how two personalities may be best combined in a relationship remains, at present, an unresolved issue. Yet your choice of mate will color every aspect of your life, your morning conversations in bed and at the breakfast table, your friendships, family reunions, and weekend frolics, where you live, how you raise your children, most likely even your career. And certainly this choice will affect your tomorrows. Those babies you are likely to produce and send forth to multiply are your genetic future. Only a few times in your life will you mix your seed with that of another and pitch your DNA toward infinity. So whom you choose matters. In fact, I found it hard to believe that evolution would leave this decision entirely to our human whims. I suspected that psychologists simply had not looked for the underlying biological mechanisms that direct our romantic choices. So when the folks at Match.com asked me to consider helping them develop a sister site for their internet dating service, one designed for men and women interested in a long-term partnership, I said I would think about it during the festive midwinter lull. The holiday season twinkled on. But on New Year's Day, I realized I had to come to grips with this opportunity, a chance to apply the newest data in neuroscience to the essential question of who you love, perhaps even help people find the one. So I sat down at my empty desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. What did I know about personality? Dopamine. I began with this brain chemical because I had studied the activities of this powerful and ubiquitous neurotransmitter for several years. On impulse, I listed some of the personality traits I knew were associated with specific genes in the dopamine system: the propensity to seek novelty, the willingness to take risks, spontaneity, heightened energy, curiosity, creativity, optimism, enthusiasm, mental flexibility. I decided to call those men and women who expressed the traits associated with this biology explorers. Patrick, I would come to realize, had a good deal of the explorer in him. I drew out another blank sheet of paper from my desk drawer. What else did I know about personality? Well, individuals who have inherited particular genes in the serotonin system tend to be calm, social, cautious but not fearful, persistent, loyal, fond of rules and facts, and orderly. They are conventional, the guardians of tradition. And because these men and women are also skilled at building social networks and managing people in family, business, and social situations, I dubbed those who had inherited this constellation of genetic traits builders. I had also studied testosterone. Although testosterone is often associated with males, I knew that both men and women are capable of expressing particularly strong activity in this neural system. Moreover, those who inherit this chemistry tend to be direct, decisive, focused, analytical, logical, tough-minded, exacting, emotionally contained, and good at strategic thinking. They get to the point. Many are bold and competitive. They excel at figuring out machines, mathematical formulas, and other rule-based systems. Many are good at understanding the structure of music, too. I named these people directors. Last in my store of biological knowledge were some of the traits linked with estrogen. Women and men with a great deal of estrogen activity tend to see the big picture. They connect disparate facts to think contextually and holistically, expressing what I call web thinking. They are imaginative. They display superior verbal skills and excel at reading postures, gestures, facial expressions, and tones of voice, known as executive social skills. They're also intuitive, sympathetic, nurturing, mentally flexible, agreeable, idealistic, altruistic, and emotionally expressive. I christened the people in this broad biological type negotiators. Other chemical systems play a role in personality, of course. We may have as many as 100 different kinds of neurotransmitters and some 50 types of peptides in the brain. But most keep the heart beating or orchestrate other basic functions. It is increasingly apparent that these four chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen, play lead roles in producing aspects of personality. Two others should be mentioned, though. Norepinephrine, a chemical closely related to dopamine, undoubtedly contributes to some of the explorer's traits, especially their energy and impulsivity. And oxytocin, a chemical synthesized, stored, and triggered in large part by estrogen, most likely plays a role in the negotiator's compassion, nurturing, trust, and intuition. In fact, families of chemicals produce the explorer, builder, director, and negotiator. The specific activities of any one chemical is not as significant as the ratios and interactions among all of them and several other neural systems. Nevertheless, only dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen have been directly associated with a wide range of personality traits. So variations in these four chemicals most likely form the foundation of these four basic styles of thinking and behaving. But does your personality type guide who you love? I decided to find out. So I accepted the consulting job as scientific advisor to what would become the new internet dating site, Chemistry.com. And in January 2005, I began to create the core statements in the questionnaire members would fill out when they joined this service, a questionnaire to establish their personality type. I based all of my queries on genetics and neurochemistry. For example, I posed the statement, I do things on the spur of the moment. I reasoned that explorers would be most likely to strongly agree because certain genes in the dopamine system are associated with impulsivity. My friends and family would say I have traditional values. Because the drive to follow social norms is a hallmark of the serotonin system, I thought builders would be particularly partial to this statement. To establish the degree to which a member is a director, I offered the statement, I am more analytical and logical than most people. High testosterone men and women, I believed, would feel this described them accurately. And because negotiators tend to be highly imaginative, due in part to estrogen activity, I included the statement, I vividly imagine both wonderful and horrible things happening to me. Then, with psychologists Jonathan Rich and Heidi Island, whom I invited to join me on this project, I perfected the questionnaire. It was then launched nationally as part of Chemistry.com in February 2006. The point of this test? To measure your biological profile for dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen, or the degree to which you are an explorer, builder, director, and negotiator. As I write this paragraph, some 5 million Americans have filled out this questionnaire, along with another 1.5 million in 34 other countries. Because this personality test forms the basis of the more extensive questionnaire and matching system used by Chemistry.com. And upon reviewing the data in an anonymous American sample of 39,913 of these questionnaires, I vividly saw how differently each of these 4 personality types thinks and acts. But I wanted to know more. Does each personality type like to do something different on Saturday night? What are their religious and political preferences? Do they pursue different vocations? Where does each type prefer to live? What kinds of friends does each type see regularly? A social crowd, intellectuals, adventurers, or activists? How often does each type fall in love? What are their views on kissing in public? Do they regard sex as an important part of marriage? How much personal autonomy and closeness does each type need in a partnership? I was even curious about the state of their sock drawer, messy or neat. So I also asked these and other questions and examined the responses of this same sample of 39,913 anonymous members of Chemistry.com. The group's average age was 37, 56% were women, 89% were heterosexual. Explorers were 26% of the sample, while builders were 28%, directors were 16%, and negotiators were 29% of the population. Sure enough, each broad personality type does fraternize with a different crowd, wants to live in a different place, and has different religious values. These 4 types even doodle differently. And birth order makes no difference in one's personality type. One of many indications that I was measuring 4 different temperament types, styles of thinking and behaving that stem from our biology and are soft-wired in the brain long before we leave the womb. All of the statistical data collected in this sample of 39,913 anonymous men and women, what I call the personality type study, as well as information from genetics, neuroscience, anthropology, psychology, and other scientific disciplines, form the basis of my understanding of explorers, builders, directors, and negotiators. Next, I needed to find out if a person's biological temperament steers him or her toward a particular personality type as a romantic partner. I had some evidence that each type would be particularly suited to a specific other. Nevertheless, I did a second study, the mate choice study, using statistical data on a different sample, 28,128 anonymous heterosexual members of Chemistry.com. And when I examined whom these men and women chose to meet, I saw nature's plan. Explorers are attracted to other explorers, people with many similar traits of temperament. Builders also gravitate to people like themselves, other builders. Directors, however, gravitate to negotiators, and negotiators are drawn to directors. These 2 personality types are attracted to individuals with a complementary temperament instead. Moreover, these patterns occur whether one is male or female. No wonder so many scientists and laymen think that opposites attract, while so many others believe that birds of a feather flock together. Both patterns occur depending on your primary personality type. I felt as if I had sneaked into Mother Nature's kitchen and stumbled on one of her recipes for who we love. But how does one individual on an internet dating site scan through an array of photographs and essays and select, even recognize, individuals of a particular biological type? As it turns out, our faces and our words say much about who we are. What's in a face? Take the iris of the eye. The crypts or pits of the iris, and the furrows, the lines curving around the outer edge of the iris, are linked with specific traits of temperament. People with more furrows are more impulsive, as well as more willing to indulge their cravings, traits of the explorer. Individuals with more crypts, however, are more trusting, warm-hearted, and tender, traits of the negotiator. Perhaps this is, at least in part, why we stare into the eyes of a potential lover, even in a photograph. We are unconsciously picking up subtle messages about temperament, how he or she is likely to think and behave years down the road. We signal even more about our temperament with the structure of our face. Chiseled and square jaws, high prominent cheekbones, heavy brow ridges, and high broad foreheads are all signs of testosterone activity, a primary chemical of the director. Even women with elevated testosterone display many of these traits. Just look at the high cheekbones, high chins, and high foreheads of many female celebrities. Both sexes also signal estrogen levels with their face. Clear, smooth skin, full lips, small noses, round, soft faces, delicate brow ridges, and other baby-like features all indicate high estrogen activity. I found no studies that report on the facial traits associated with dopamine, the dominant chemical of the explorer, or serotonin, the primary chemical of the builder. With one exception, individuals with specific dopamine activity tend to have more expressive faces. Nevertheless, I suspect explorers and builders both have distinctive facial signals, and someday scientists will discover them. Promise, large promise, is the soul of an advertisement, Samuel Johnson, the 18th century literary lion, said. We promise much with our faces, including some of the fundamental traits of temperament we bring to a partnership. The lure of words. Explorers, builders, directors, and negotiators also signal their particular temperaments with their words. This proposition has a history, known as the lexical hypothesis. In the 1930s, psychologists proposed that when individuals describe themselves, they choose words and phrases that emphasize traits they regard as central to who they are. With time, these words become encoded in their speaking habits. So using another statistical sample, this time of 178,532 anonymous men and women on Chemistry.com, I launched my word type study. I composed a list of 170 words and examined how often each personality type used these words as they described themselves and what they were looking for in a mate. Adventure is the word most often used by explorers. The other 9 of their top 10 most used words, in descending order, are venture, spontaneity, spontaneous, energy, new, fun, traveling, outgoing, passion, and active. Family is the most used word among builders. Following this, builders are particularly partial to the words honesty, caring, morals, respect, loyal, trust, values, loving, and trustworthy. Intelligent and intelligence together top the list of words used by directors, but they also favor intellectual, debate, geek, nerd or nerdy, ambition, ambitious, driven, politics, challenge and challenging, and real. Can you guess the favorite words of negotiators? Passion and passionate. These men and women also prefer real, heart, kind, kindness, sensitivity, read and reader, sweet, learning and learn, random and empathetic, empathy. Words, words, words. As Mark Twain said, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. Words are verbal electricity. As members of Chemistry.com read the essays of potential partners, they apparently see specific words that instantly draw them to particular personality types. Your primary and secondary type. We are billboards of our genetic dispositions, and although each of us is a unique blend of all 4 personality types, we express some of these types more regularly and more naturally than others. I, for example, am predominantly an explorer and secondarily a negotiator. I have a few traits of the director and even fewer of the builder, and at times I can act out of character. But I've come to think that both your primary and secondary biological type are central to your temperament. Patrick, Suzanne's new husband, certainly advertised his primary and secondary types. He is primarily a negotiator and secondarily an explorer, and Patrick showed many of the qualities of both these types minutes after he bounded into that Italian restaurant on his wedding night. Foremost, Patrick was instantly likable. He had a fine-tuned sensitivity to those around him and a superb talent for handling people. He radiated warmth and authenticity. Moreover, Patrick cared. He spent his spare time teaching English to immigrants from Africa and Asia, and sending supplies to war refugees in foreign camps. Indeed, his verbal skills, his easy way with people, his compassion, and his mental flexibility enabled him to thrive in countries where few dare to work and many fail who do. Patrick was a negotiator through and through. But his secondary type, the explorer, was also highly visible. Patrick was infectiously spontaneous. When asked during the wedding ceremony to sip some wine, he good-naturedly responded, "All of it?" During one of the rock numbers, he grabbed the mic and did an Elvis Presley imitation in his stately white wedding suit, the antics of a true social risk-taker. And all evening he wove through the balloons to every table and dragged complacent singles out to swing to the rock and roll. Patrick was a fine blend of the verbal, imaginative, compassionate negotiator and the energetic, novelty-seeking explorer. Suzanne must have sized him up as soon as she saw his photo and read his essays on chemistry.com. I didn't spend much time with Suzanne on her wedding night. She was understandably very busy. But she had told me she was primarily a director and secondarily a builder, so I could make some educated estimations about her temperament. As a director, Suzanne was most likely more focused than her new husband. She probably shot straight for her goals in a determined yet inventive way. Along with that gorgeous face and hourglass figure, Suzanne was almost certainly more forthright, analytical, exacting, and autonomous, too. And as a builder, she was probably more conscientious and cautious than her new mate. The right fit. Most remarkable about that lovely wedding, Patrick and Suzanne fit one of nature's patterns perfectly. As you recall, their primary types, the negotiator and the director, gravitate to one another. Moreover, their secondary types, the explorer and the builder, can balance one another, each providing strengths the other needs. So as I watched Patrick and Suzanne exchange their vows, then twirl around the dance floor, I found myself imagining how they would get along in the years ahead. Would they still be in love 50 years from now? I thought they would, for biological reasons. Negotiators and directors are very different in basic temperament, but these types can appreciate each other's mode of thinking. Both like to imagine possibilities and generate theories, so Patrick and Suzanne will probably enjoy talking together for years about their insights and personal philosophies. Yet each will bring complementary skills to their conversations. While Patrick will see the big picture, Suzanne will probably know more about the smaller piece of the social, political, or ethical puzzle. Each will almost certainly impress the other with their knowledge and ideas. These two types value their independence, although Suzanne is likely to be far better at expressing her autonomy, since directors tend to be forthright and tough-minded. But Patrick will appreciate Suzanne's frank, decisive nature, because negotiators ruminate. They tend to live in an inner world full of soul-searching, options, and ethical knots that keep them from making up their minds. There will be mutual admiration, too. Suzanne is likely to admire Patrick's imagination and insight and his ability to understand and deal effectively with people. She will also bask in his compassion, exuberance, and sincerity, and her skepticism will balance Patrick's easy trust. But life won't be all roses for this dynamic couple. Directors admire self-control, so at times Suzanne will think Patrick's impulsivity is a bit over the top. She may become impatient with his intuitive side, too. Directors are logical, and the negotiator's flights of imagination can leave them feeling ungrounded. Meanwhile, Patrick may occasionally find Suzanne's pragmatism maddening. Their secondary types, the explorer and the builder, will also have an impact on their relationship. Patrick may occasionally feel hemmed in by Suzanne's caution, while Suzanne may become annoyed when Patrick is impractical. Nevertheless, nature has given Patrick and Suzanne many complementary primary and secondary traits. With this great boost from their biological dispositions, along with a bit of work and some luck, They may have an excellent chance of remaining forever in sync, just the way they were as they swung around that dance floor that exhilarating wedding evening, two very different individuals in perfect step with one another. In the Symposium, Plato describes a dinner party in Athens, in the home of Agathon, in 416 BC. Many of the pundits of classical Greek were in attendance, and as they reclined on their couches, one guest suggested that they entertain themselves by describing the god of love. All agreed, and each took their turn eulogizing love. It was at this gathering that Aristophanes spun his well-known tale of ancient men and women. Each couple, he mused, was originally a single entity: 2 heads, 2 torsos, 2 sets of genitals, 4 legs. Each man-woman was one beast. But these giants became obstreperous, and because they threatened to assume the throne of Zeus, this master of the universe retaliated, splitting each giant into halves, creating man and woman. Ever since, Aristophanes declared, each of us has been searching for our missing other half. What are your primary and secondary personality traits? Please take my personality test on the PDF file, which you can find on the last disc of this program, so I can begin to offer you some of nature's insights on who you are, why you're attracted to one person rather than another, and how to find, understand, and keep your other half. Chapter 3. Oh, wad some power the gifty gie us to see ourselves as others see us. Robert Burns. The hand you're dealt, nature's dice. So who are you? Nobody knows what's in him until he tries to pull it out, wrote Ernest Hemingway. What have you pulled out about yourself after taking this personality test? Are you a builder, negotiator, a director, explorer, or some other combination? No mix is better or worse, of course. In fact, we are all a blend of all 4 types. We simply measure higher on some of these scales than others. But I've come to believe that your top 2 personality types generally dominate your personality. This is not to say that your biology is your fate. We are not puppets dangling on a string of DNA. In fact, before I tell you more about this personality test and who you are, I must emphasize that your temperament goes hand in hand with all of your life experiences to make you who you are. This I am sure of, because I have an identical twin sister, Lorna. We inherited the same biology, and we're both explorer negotiators. Yet our individual experiences have sculpted us into different human beings. To begin with, we can both tolerate risk. Lorna is a hot air balloon pilot. She rides the air currents above the mountains of Colorado and Switzerland with only an oversized Bunsen burner to control her waist-high basket. As an anthropologist, I discuss in public such prickly topics as sex, adultery, divorce, and gender differences. So we probably both express the same dopamine activity, the chemical associated with taking risks that predominates in the explorer. Lorna is also an oil painter. And although this profession has no obvious similarities with mine as a writer, Lorna builds a canvas with thousands of tiny brush strokes, while I write books with thousands of little words. We're both focused, and we both make our living by being creative, more signs of similar dopamine activity. We also both have jobs that require good people skills, so we undoubtedly have the same levels of estrogen, a primary chemical of the negotiator. Moreover, neither of us works in the corporate world or armed services, environments where structure, rules, and lines of command prevail. Instead, we both work for ourselves. We both work alone. We both keep flexible schedules, pursue self-made goals, and have unconventional occupations. So most likely, we both express low serotonin activity, the principal chemical of the builder. And we both have the same degree of sex drive, suggesting that we both inherited the same base levels of testosterone, the major hormone of the director. Nevertheless, my daily life as an anthropologist and writer is very different from Lorna's as a balloon pilot and painter. We wear different kinds of clothes, pursue different sports, read different kinds of books, even live in different countries. Lorna and I are not replicas of each other. My point is that all explorers, builders, directors, and negotiators are not alike. Some explorers climb mountains, others are history buffs, antique collectors, theater-goers, or voracious readers. Some builders manage businesses, others become soldiers or accountants, others are priests, rabbis, or imams. Some directors work in a lab around the clock to find the cure for cancer, others design computer chips, work in an auto body shop, or tinker in their garage. And some negotiators leave countries to peace at the conference table, others teach kindergarten, others are active in social causes. The test you've just taken measures your innate dispositions, the hand you're dealt. Upon this genetic foundation, you build your fuller personality with your choices and experiences. Nevertheless, people are inclined to think and act in broadly different ways, those of the explorer, builder, director, and negotiator. And most of us predominantly express two of these personality styles. There are exceptions, of course. My friend Keith, for example, regularly displays traits from 3 of these 4 personality types. He's highly personable, as well as poetic with words and verbal images, all traits of the negotiator. But he makes his living as a world-class neuroscientist, performing complex technical laboratory experiments in the manner of the director. And his scientific theories, speeches, and poems all demonstrate the curiosity, creativity, flair, and daring of the explorer. Others express all 4 personality types almost equally. Take Jennifer, an editor at a major American publishing firm in New York. After finishing my personality test, Jennifer called to tell me her scores were almost identical on all 4 scales. "I must be terribly boring," she exclaimed. "Hardly," I replied. "You're simply well-balanced." But even though her scores are very close, I suspect Jennifer's primary and secondary types are still the best indicators of who she is. Most of us can also pretend to be people we are not. As Miguel exclaimed in Cervantes' Don Quixote, "I know who I am, and I know too that I am capable of being not only the characters I have named, but all of the 12 peers of France, and all of the 9 worthies as well." We are all capable of acting out of character, but doing so is tiring. Explorers who crave novelty are likely to have difficulty maintaining a boring work regime or rigid social schedule indefinitely. Cautious builders will not be comfortable leading a life on the edge for more than a few weeks or months. Decisive, tough-minded directors are likely to become more and more impatient if forced to wait for others to make up their minds. And compassionate, nurturing negotiators are not likely to enjoy a job where they have to be ruthless, such as torturing people to get information or choosing who will live and who will die during an evacuation. Your temperament is not entirely malleable. This became clear to me one evening shortly after I had made a speech in Washington, D.C. A woman from the audience had come up to me and explained that she had been dating a man for 3 years, but never really felt like herself when she was with him. She pretended to like military history and television sports to please him. Around him, she also behaved with a zany, naive zest that she didn't recognize in herself. She managed to pull it off, she said, but her performances exhausted her. "When he leaves town on a business trip," she confided, "I slip back into my down-to-earth self again." Integrity simply means a willingness not to violate one's identity, wrote psychologist Erich Fromm. I suspect this woman will eventually become so uncomfortable that she will begin to behave like herself with her lover. And as she regains her integrity, her relationship will either mature or fail. But no matter what happens to her relationship, she will probably like herself better. I say this because I continue to notice that just about everybody who takes this personality test seems to be happy with his or her basic temperament. Explorers like being curious and spontaneous. Builders like being cautious, loyal, and traditional. Directors like their decisiveness, logic, and exactitude. Negotiators like their empathy, altruism, and imagination. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "I think somehow we learn who we really are and then live with that decision." We more than live with it, we like it. I first realized that people tend to like their particular temperament during an awkward moment in my office. A young woman had contacted me looking for a summer job. She'd just gotten her PhD in psychology from a local university, and she wanted to work with a dating service. In she marched one spring afternoon, a tiny, trim, alert young woman all buttoned up in a business suit. She settled on my couch, and we began the interview. Within a few minutes, I asked her if she'd taken my personality test. She had. "What is your primary type?" I asked. "A director," she replied. "Oh," I responded. I suddenly had a queasy feeling. I had just described the director's tendency to be direct, sometimes blunt, even rude. So I started to reassure her, saying that she was probably very socially savvy and nice to people. There was a pause. Then she snapped, "I'm not nice to people. My sister's always so nice to everybody, even people she doesn't like. I think that's weak. I like to say what I mean." I was aghast at my mistake. In my effort to ascribe to her some of the traits that I particularly admire, those of negotiators like myself, I had offended this fierce young director. Will this feisty young woman still say what she means 30 years from now? I suspect she will. For decades, psychologists have been examining how much a person's personality changes over time. They measure such changes by a method called test-retest. They give the same test to the same person on several different occasions, spaced over weeks, months, or years. Then they compare these scores. The results? Most traits of temperament remain stable across your life. Children and teenagers have more variable test-retest scores, probably because they tend to change their perception of themselves as more of their capabilities emerge. Scores of the elderly are also more changeable across time, perhaps because senior citizens have learned to adapt their personality to suit the occasion. Men and women who test most accurately and consistently on personality tests are those who are active and free to express their natural dispositions, most of them people in middle age. Certain traits do tend to change over your life, however. Adolescents around the world tend to be more anxious, open to new experience, and extroverted, as well as less conscientious and agreeable. In their 20s, they begin to change. And by middle age, men and women in countries as different as England, Germany, the Czech Republic, and Turkey become more conscientious and agreeable, and less extroverted, open to new experiences, and anxious. But even in one's middle years, people going through a life-altering experience can misrepresent themselves on a personality test. Marrying, divorcing, losing or winning an important job, retiring, the death of an important friend or family member, addiction, a serious illness, any of life's joys or traumas can alter who you think you are. Remarkably, life-altering events can even turn specific genes on and off, creating enduring changes in your personality. Not always for the worse. Sometimes these events are so dramatic that they unleash undeveloped traits we never knew we had. This kind of transformation must have happened to a former landlord of mine, George. George was the worst kind of proprietor, miserly and disagreeable. He was so cheap that he refused to send heat or hot water to my 4th-story walk-up. Just as irritating, when George painted the building stairwell, he painted it only as far as his own landing on the 2nd floor, leaving the upper 2 stories of the townhouse to continue peeling. Moreover, he constantly accused all the tenants of unfounded misdeeds. He was at his worst one morning when he pounded on my door, then berated me for pitching chewed artichoke leaves into the narrow hallway and down the building's steep old stairs. To be sure, I had eaten an artichoke the night before, but I certainly hadn't strewn my garbage through the building. But as George stood there fuming, I could see around him. Yes, there were my artichoke leaves, along with lemon wedges and other familiar edibles, all scattered along the stairwell. But when I pointed out that his lazy son must have spilled the contents of my trash bag as he dragged it across the nails that protruded from the rotting steps, George sputtered with rage. Soon after this ridiculous incident, George experienced a life-changing event. He got cancer. Remarkably, he emerged from this experience as an agreeable man. And although he never sent enough heat or hot water to my apartment, or painted the stairwell past his own front door, he remained gentlemanly, even gracious, until I left the building many years later. Which personality style was more natural to George? I will never know. But unless you undergo a mind-bending event, you will probably continue to be your unique combination of explorer, builder, director, and negotiator for much, if not all, of your life. But can you game this personality test, altering your answers to become someone you would prefer to be? This question has interested psychologists for decades. Most believe there are 3 ways to view your results on any questionnaire. The test may capture who you really are, or who you think you are, your self-concept, or how you wish to be perceived by others, your self-presentation. All 3 types of results say interesting things about you. Nevertheless, evidence indicates that most questionnaires measure who you really are. Interestingly, personality tests like the one you just took, that use obvious, broad, simple statements such as "I do things on the spur of the moment" and "I am tough-minded," are more trustworthy than those using more subtle queries, too. In fact, when researchers add questions that are designed to measure lying and posing, these additional queries do not improve the validity of the results. How about national character? Will your nationality make you more of an explorer, builder, director, or negotiator? Actually, I intend to find out because my personality test is currently being offered on the Match.com internet site in 34 other countries. As I analyze these international data, I expect to see how culture influences temperament. But another personality test has already shown that men and women living in Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Lebanon, Estonia, and 43 other countries, speaking a total of 27 different languages, share an array of personality traits, be they old or young, rich or poor, pink or brown. Your beliefs about family, God, sex, and community, and your taste in literature, music, and food will vary depending on where, when, and how you were brought up. But your degree of curiosity, creativity, traditionalism, calm, decisiveness, and compassion are not likely to differ whether you live in Cairo, Tokyo, or La Paz. These 4 personality types, the explorer, builder, director, and negotiator, stem from biology, not culture. Animal minds. Some of the core traits of these personality types are even seen in other animals, suggesting that aspects of these 4 basic behavioral styles come across the eons, up from creatures in our deep history. Take curiosity, a hallmark of the explorer. When scientists put a pink panther doll near the open cages of several great tits, the European version of the chickadee, some hopped right up to investigate it, while others lingered in their cages. You don't have to have a big human brain to be curious. Even some fish are more curious than others. Conscientiousness, a core trait of the builder, is also seen in other creatures. A stunning example is Safi, a German shepherd and longtime companion of a renowned primatologist, Barb Smuts. Barb picked up Safi at an animal shelter while Safi was still a pup. Before taking her home, however, Barb stopped at a local park full of dogs. Safi immediately joined the rough-and-tumble play of the local pooch population until a squirrel darted by. Immediately all dashed after it, heading for the woods. "Here, Princey! Come, Muffin!" various owners shouted. Barb hadn't named her new puppy yet, so she just screamed, "Come back!" Safi was the only dog that heeded, returning immediately to Barb's side. Safi proved to be conscientious all her life. If Barb took a nap while on a hike, for example, Safi refused to sleep beside her. She stood guard. Only after Barb woke would Safi rest. Birds and mammals are not the only creatures with individual personalities. Some Drosophila flies behave a little bit like directors, being far more aggressive than others of their kind. Scientists observed this phenomenon when they constructed a home for a community of these creatures, known as fruit flies because they dart around your fruit on the kitchen counter on summer days. This particular housing project consisted of a small walk-in closet with 2 little honeyed poles where the Drosophila could alight and dine. It was a nice place to live, with room for every fly. Yet every morning when the researchers entered to examine who was doing what, they found a single male dominating one of the 2 feeding stations while all the rest of the other flies crowded on the other. And if you know one octopus, you do not know them all. Take Leisure Suit Larry, a giant Pacific octopus that lived until recently in an aquarium in Seattle. Scientists named him for his sexual approaches to anyone who passed his tank. With him lived Emily Dickinson, a painfully shy female octopus who perpetually hid behind the aquarium rocks, and the devilish Lucretia McEvil, who regularly destroyed the water filter and knocked over all the rocks in the dead of night. In the animal kingdom, these 4 personality types are probably best observed, however, among a group of chimpanzees living in a colony at the Arnhem Zoo in Holland. When the primatologist Frans de Waal arrived there in 1975 to study the chimps, there were a total of 23 males and females in the colony. Dandy was the colony's explorer, a true risk-taker. Every time the group staged a breakout from their pen, Dandy led the way. De Waal called him the mastermind behind the escapes. Louis was particularly agreeable, a core trait of the negotiator. He had an open and friendly character, and set great store by company, de Waal observed. Huron was known for his ambition. He keeps a close watch on his interests, wrote de Waal. No one else is considered when he is pursuing his goal. He's a real go-getter. Like Huron, many directors jeopardize their health, safety, and family lives to get ahead. And Mama was calm and managerial, a true guardian and peacekeeper. She enjoyed enormous respect from the community, according to de Waal. Builders, the pillars of society, are found among chimpanzees as well as humans. For centuries, people have known that animals of many species have distinct and unique personalities. They have bred birds, dogs, and horses for particular personality traits. Indeed, if I could magically convert my personality test into animal languages and entice whales, penguins, mink, rhinoceroses, and all of our other furry and feathered relatives to take it, I am convinced I would find explorers, builders, directors, and negotiators living in all of nature's wildest places. Evolution of personality. Aspects of these 4 broad temperament styles probably evolved long before the dinosaurs tramped the steamy earth. Among the billions of creatures that lived across these eons, nature sometimes favored individuals that explored their environment. At other times, it selected for those who were more cautious, or more aggressive, or more socially adept. And gradually these core personality constellations, the forerunners of our modern human explorers, builders, directors, and negotiators, proliferated among species as different as the ancestors of fruit flies, octopuses, and chimps. Then, as our human forebears descended from the fast disappearing trees of ancient Africa some 5 million years ago, those with different dispositions took on different roles in their tiny bands. The ancestors of contemporary explorers roamed far into the dangerous grass, returning with meat, nuts, and information. The ancestors of today's cautious builders guarded the group and gradually built the rituals of tribal life. The predecessors of our modern, mechanically minded directors invented better spears and traps and calculated the coming of the rains and waning of the moon. And the forebearers of today's imaginative and intuitive negotiators held the group together with their social skills. As our ancestors pooled their natural strengths, they lived another day, another generation. Variability within the group had important social and economic payoffs, so these 4 basic personality types prevailed. Scientists have even proposed that a specific gene for novelty-seeking, a trait of the explorer, originated as a rare mutation that became more common because it was so useful to survival. To test this theory, they gave groups of men and women jobs to do as a team. Sure enough, teams with some members carrying this gene in the dopamine system for risk-taking excelled. Risk-takers, the scientists concluded, help a group survive. Specific genes for many other traits must have been adaptive too. and over time, the biological underpinnings of these four broad personality types, the explorer, builder, director, and negotiator, were passed across the eons to you and me. Indeed, psychologist David Kiersey reports that these four basic personality types have been noted in Western history since the time of the ancient Greeks. Hippocrates, a Greek physician living between 460 and 370 BC, first proposed the concept of the four broad temperament styles based on the four humors. Aristotle believed that humankind sought happiness in one of four ways: through sensual pleasure, through acquiring assets, in logical investigation, or in expressing moral virtue. Aristotle perfectly described core traits of the explorer, builder, director, and negotiator. Galen, a Roman doctor living in the 2nd century AD, again defined the primary traits of these four types. Sanguine individuals, he believed, were optimistic, impulsive, energetic, and fun-loving, traits of the explorer. Melancholic individuals were thoughtful, ponderous, and meticulous, much like builders. Phlegmatic men and women were unemotional, rational, and observant, common traits of the director. And choleric individuals were passionate, a core trait of the negotiator. Since then, the 16th century Viennese physician Paracelsus, the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and later philosophers and psychologists including Rudolf Steiner, Alfred Adler, Erich Atticus, Erich Fromm, and most notably Carl Jung, have all embraced the idea that each of us has inherited a specific constellation of biological traits. The most extensive categorization of temperament comes, however, from the work of Isabel Briggs Myers and her mother Catherine Cook Briggs. In the late 1940s, these women began to develop what would become the world's most popular personality questionnaire, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. This test has now been translated into 16 languages and taken by some 30 million people to cultivate self-knowledge and group communication. Why is the Myers-Briggs test so popular? Because it works, thanks to biology. Although Isabel Myers was unaware of it, most of her types fit the same four basic biological profiles that I've identified. Then in the 1990s, psychologist David Kiersey, a protege of Isabel Myers, simplified her schema to four basic personality types: the artisan, guardian, rational, and idealist. I was unaware of Kiersey's types when I outlined my own set of four personality styles while sitting at my desk that New Year's Day in 2005. Only later did I become aware of the striking similarities. These four personality types are also represented in non-Western traditions. For example, several North American Indian tribes historically living on the Great Plains of today's Midwest believed in a sacred medicine wheel, representing the circle of life. To the east soared the eagle, the symbol of vision and illumination. To the west was the bear, a steady, cautious creature that hunkered in caves and didn't roam. North was represented by the buffalo, the epitome of reason and wisdom. To the south was the mouse, symbolizing innocence and trust. Each of these creatures represents basic traits of either the explorer, builder, director, or negotiator. In short, animal behaviorists, physicians, philosophers, and psychologists have been describing central aspects of these four personality types for over 2,000 years. But I have had the advantage of 21st century science, enabling me to link these four temperament constellations with their biological underpinnings. So the personality test you've just taken examines these basic aspects of who you are, the part of you that began to evolve long before our first human ancestors strode the earth. But why did our human forebears evolve the tendency to be far more attracted to some types than to others? As you know, explorers are more attracted to explorers, and builders gravitate to other builders, while directors are significantly more likely to choose to meet negotiators, and negotiators usually choose to meet directors. Why him? Why her? This is what the folks at Match.com originally asked me over the Christmas holiday in 2004. As I think about each of these patterns of attraction, I can see why they evolved. Take the attraction of the director and the negotiator. Directors are tough-minded, direct, decisive, focused, technically skilled, and competitive, traits many negotiators need. Negotiators, on the hand, are socially skilled, talented with words, mentally flexible and compassionate, traits many directors need. Furthermore, both types like to play with ideas and theories, yet the director can bring depth to these discussions while the negotiator offers the broad overview. Interestingly, these types may even enrich each other's temperament biologically. When the assertive director challenges the pacific negotiator, the director may trigger the release of testosterone in the negotiator, thereby making the latter more assertive too. And when the more affectionate negotiator strokes and hugs the director, this physical contact may trigger the release of oxytocin, and thus also estrogen, in the competitive director, perhaps making the director more trusting, intuitive, compassionate, and nurturing. Most important, when the director and negotiator pool their natural talents, they make a powerful team for raising young. But why would builders seek other builders? Probably because these men and women are so traditional, loyal, and devoted to home and family. Can you think of a better combination for raising babies than two loyal and devoted parents? In fact, data show that these serotonin-rich men and women also marry people like themselves. I suspect that most of the world's 50-year marriages are made by builders who marry other builders. It's a fine strategy for perpetuating your DNA. But what about the attraction between two explorers? Studies have shown that these dopamine-rich men and women marry people like themselves, not only in the United States, but also in Germany and the Netherlands. Who is going to raise the baby if both parents constantly dash off to do something new, either physically or intellectually? Explorers also express more dissatisfaction with their relationships, and these sensation seekers are more likely to divorce. The explorer-explorer match does not appear to be a good strategy for raising children. Yet here, too, nature has a plan. Since explorers are more likely to divorce and remarry, they are also more likely to bear children with more than one partner. In fact, it's commonplace to encounter a man or woman who has married twice and had children with each spouse. I don't recommend divorce and remarriage, but there's genetic wisdom here. In deep history, famines and other catastrophes weeded out many family members, particularly children. If ancestral explorers produced more variety in their young, some of these children could survive hard times, passing on their DNA. Long ago, 4 very broad temperament types evolved among our forebears. Moreover, each type became particularly drawn to those who either complemented or accentuated their personality in ways that would help them rear their young. Directors and negotiators pooled their very different resources. Builders capitalized on their strengths to produce many young with a single partner, and explorers created variety in their offspring. All were successful ways to combine and spread their genes. They still are. There's undoubtedly far more to nature's scheme. Your secondary type also figures in your choice of a romantic partner. For example, I can see the impact of my secondary type in my own relationships. As you know, I'm an explorer-negotiator, but I gravitate to explorer-directors. Look at the symmetry. As an explorer, I have someone to go adventuring with, another explorer. As a negotiator, I have someone who urges me to be more tough-minded and decisive, a director. There's no bad match. Each type of partnership simply has different strengths and weaknesses and a different combination of many essential traits. But before moving on to chapters on who you are and who you love, I should mention that I do not measure one trait you may regard as central to your personality and your relationship, your degree of extroversion. Why? Foremost, because I feel the concepts of extroversion and introversion are widely misunderstood. Psychologists regularly regard extroverts as outgoing, gregarious, assertive, energetic, enthusiastic, and talkative. These people, they say, feel more joy, more pleasure, and more of the positive emotions. Introverts are supposedly shy and reserved instead. But this definition excludes an essential aspect of extroversion, how you get your energy. As Isabel Myers ingeniously put it, extroverts are focused on the external world. They get their energy from others. Introverts, on the other hand, are oriented inward. As they explore their inner universe of feelings and ideas, they become relaxed, rested, and renewed. Despite her perceptiveness, Myers and her colleagues failed to measure this core aspect of extroversion and introversion in their famous test. Nevertheless, I like Myers' original definitions of the extrovert and introvert. They agree with my own experience. My twin sister Lorna, for example, is affable, as well as energetic, talkative, and enthusiastic. She's a good mixer. She's comfortable with people, and she makes and keeps friends easily, but she doesn't gravitate to them in her spare time. On Saturday afternoon, she would rather ride the winds above Switzerland in her hot air balloon, sail the Mediterranean in a tiny boat, or hole up in her studio in southern France and paint. And in the evening, she often goes to the theater or an art exhibit rather than a social gathering. The great pianist Vladimir Horowitz apparently had a similar tendency. When asked his price to play the piano at a Paris gala and then preside at a grand reception attended by all the local notables, he reportedly replied, "My fee is 100,000, 5,000 to play the piano, and 95,000 to attend the reception." Horowitz would probably have agreed with something Lorna once said to me, "I like people very much, but they wear me out." If introverts can be socially savvy, extroverts can be socially awkward. Take Sally, a neuroscientist. Sally is self-conscious. She makes long pauses and blurts out non-sequiturs as she speaks. Yet in her spare time, she entertains at home or goes out with groups of friends. As Sally says, "I love people. I suck energy from them." To my way of thinking, Lorna and Horowitz are sociable introverts, while Sally is a social yet bumbling extrovert. Moreover, I expect that each personality type expresses extroversion differently. Extroverted explorers are probably flamboyant conversationalists until the tedium of seeing the same people regularly drives them to fresh adventures. Builders probably have the most friends and acquaintances of the four types, but avoid conversations that reveal their inner selves. Directors are not likely to be gregarious with a host of others because they seek deep, intense conversations. But when they do engage with someone they admire, they can be thorough, deep, and enthusiastic. And negotiators are so agreeable that they can probably behave like extroverts even when they would much prefer to have a quiet, confidential conversation with just one friend. So I regard extroversion as too complex a trait to measure on a short test. But what deterred me most from measuring this aspect of your temperament is the fact that extroverts aren't necessarily attracted to other extroverts. Introverts aren't more attracted to other introverts, and extroverts and introverts aren't significantly more attracted to each other. This aspect of personality doesn't play a decisive role in romantic attraction. We choose our mates for other traits. For the same reason, I didn't test your degree of neuroticism and anxiety. People don't seek partners with a similar or different degree of these traits either. Nature's dice. Novelist Henry James once wrote, "Never say you know the last word about any human heart." Each of us is a complex combination of all four of these basic styles of thinking and behaving, and some of us override our biology as we choose romantic partners. Nevertheless, Mother Nature has rolled her dice within each of us. In fundamental ways, we are who we are, and we are naturally drawn to some people far more than others. So let's push off, in the words of poet Alfred Lord Tennyson, and follow knowledge like a sinking star. The next 4 chapters are devoted to who you are, your fundamental personality type. The rest of the book examines who you love and how to use nature's laws to find and keep the one.